Hello, everyone, and welcome to CMNCP22, the annual conference of the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention. My name is Oishi, and I work for CMNCP. Before we begin, I'd like to just quickly acknowledge that I am joining you from Hamilton, which is situated on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. Thank you all for joining us for this year's conference. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our session titled Closing the Gap, Community Responses to Addressing Homelessness at a Local Level. This session is moderated by Jordan Babando and will include presentations by Dave Howard, Gerard Joyle, and Reza Ahmadi. Because we want to make sure that each panelist has enough time for their presentation, we will, and so that we have some time for questions at the end. We won't be reading out the full bios of our moderator and panelists, but we do encourage you to check out our website where we have that full bio to learn more about our amazing presenters. And without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome our moderator for the session, Jordan. Jordan is an instructor at the Institute of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Carleton University. Thank you for agreeing to take part in this session, and I'll hand it over to you to set the stage and introduce our first presenter.
Thanks so much, Oishi. Everyone can hear me okay? Perfect, I see some nods, awesome. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this amazing panel of guest speakers. As indicated, I am moderating this panel. I have a great passion and interest in homelessness, especially in conducting community-based research that looks to bring together private and public organizations and those with lived experience and bringing them together to find meaningful solutions to the most challenging problems on the topics of homelessness. While most of my recent research has been focused on intersections of COVID-19 and homelessness, my next projects are actually going to be focusing on encampment experiences and needs of those experiencing homelessness in Ottawa, Ontario. And I'm working on a collaborative project on shelter care in the Canadian Arctic. So please stay tuned for that. As for a little background on the topic, Statistics Canada has recently indicated that more than 235,000 Canadians experience homelessness in any given year, although the current method of counting homelessness has several limitations, and that could actually lead us to speculate that the rate of homelessness is actually much higher than that. Homelessness falls under a label that I actually teach a social welfare course, and I talk about it in terms of a wicked problem. And a wicked problem are social issues that seem like they can never be solved. No matter what aspect you solve, there's always something new that pops up. So it definitely gives us plenty to research. It gives us plenty for the community to think about around how to solve these issues and come together to collaboratively find meaningful solutions. And so instead of finding permanent cures, many communities are tasked with finding these meaningful solutions that will only alleviate the issues rather than actually solve it. Homelessness rates in Canada can be seen on a spectrum where rates fluctuate depending on the available social services, housing market, rental prices, labor market, costs for basic everyday needs, geographical displacement, and available preventative programs, among many other factors. So there's definitely a lot to account for. I recently reviewed discussions of homelessness in the Canadian media, as I always do. It kind of tells us where Canadians are at and where the issues lie. It gives you good avenues to pursue problem solutions and research. And in doing this scan, I found that Canadians have expressed in several polls that they're fed up with homelessness, with the National Post recently reporting that 58% of Canadians see homelessness as a problem in their community. And with a further 38% believing that increases in homelessness have also increased acts of violence in the community. While in general, academic studies indicate that those experiencing homelessness are not necessarily more likely to offend than anyone else, there have been mixed results and concerns regarding homelessness encampments more specifically. And I feel that geographical differences and a lack of clear data tracking might be the issue. There's also stigma and fears involved as well that need to be handled. Regardless, communities have expressed considerable concern over homelessness and encampments in general. And I believe that is an issue that shouldn't be dealt with simply to protect those who are most fortunate and privileged in society, but rather to find adequate responses that will benefit everyone. Furthermore, homelessness encampments were often regarded as problems central to more large urban communities like Toronto and Vancouver, although the issue is becoming far more spread across the country. Certainly, COVID-19 has made issues with homelessness encampments more visible, which has led to some positive responses from communities, nonprofits, and governments, such as renting hotels and other buildings to expand shelter space and offering more wraparound services. Unfortunately, the rental market has witnessed steep increases that have moved people into homelessness or has placed them at greater risk of becoming homeless. And numerous COVID-19 temporary shelter spaces have since closed their doors and are continuing to do so. The pandemic has also seemed to stretch government budgets thin and has actually left shelter and frontline organizations with limited funding. So today's panel offers such a timely discussion, especially as communities look for innovative and inspiring responses to homelessness, and especially as we head into the winter months, which are very challenging times for those experiencing homelessness. Today's panel is made up of 3 amazing speakers who will each get 15 minutes to present, and I will briefly introduce each one so that everyone knows who will be speaking. After all the presentations have completed, I will note some highlights from the presentations, and then I'll open the floor to some Q&A that I'll do my best to kind of direct. I've done this last year, and it was, anyways, I just kind of go with the flow, and hopefully I don't miss anybody. I'll kind of get to that a little more when we hit that point in the panel. And then please note that one of our panelists, Reza Ahmadi, he'll need to leave at around 11:40. So if you do have any questions for Reza, then please email him and he'll do his best to actually respond at a later point in time. So that being said, I would like to begin by introducing our first panelist, Reza Ahmadi, who is the Director of Research and Evaluation with the John Howard of Ontario Centre of Research and Policy. His areas of research include reintegration, criminal records, and evaluations of youth, gang, and housing programs. Reza, he excels at translating ideas into action and is very passionate about using visual and digital media to make research and data interesting and interactive. I actually met Reza while I was working at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, and I was fortunate enough to collaborate on a research project dealing with homelessness among incarcerated individuals upon their release. He is indeed an expert at his own trade when it comes to the research, and I'm very pleased that he has accepted my invitation to present here today. Reza, thanks a lot, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jordan. As Jordan mentioned, I work at the John Howard Society of Ontario as the Director of Research and Evaluation. A little bit about John Howard. We are an organization that works with individuals involved in or at risk of being involved in the justice system. In Ontario, we have 19 local offices or chapters that provide a vast array of programs and services ranging from prevention to intervention to reintegration for those folks leaving correctional institutions. I work at the provincial office, so John Howard of Ontario, where our focus is primarily on research, evaluation, policy, and public education on behalf of our 19 local offices. So at the provincial level, we don't do any programs or services that are client-facing. So the relationship between homelessness, housing precarity, and justice involvement, including incarceration, is a prominent issue when looking at the justice system in Canada. We often talk about these issues as correlated, and the literature is quite clear on this, that justice involvement and homelessness are a vicious cycle, and they continue to reinforce one another. And people can enter the cycle on many different levels or at any stage. For example, it's easy to see how being incarcerated can lead to homelessness, loss of employment, loss of social supports, social services, create a huge barrier for formerly incarcerated individuals, which often leads them to experience homelessness. Furthermore, stigma, the impact of criminal records, and deterioration of health and mental health as a result of incarceration further enmeshes individuals in a cycle of poverty and therefore increasing their chances of homelessness. On the other hand, experiencing homelessness itself puts individuals at a greater risk of justice involvement and incarceration. Homelessness is often a symptom of poverty, and poverty is directly linked to justice involvement. And in many cases, there are laws in municipalities and regions that directly target individuals who are homeless, therefore increasing their likelihood to become involved in the justice system. Regardless of how an individual enters the cycle, what is clear that the cycle continues to entrench people further and further into both homelessness and incarceration. So this is why in academic literature, it's often called the vicious cycle, where once somebody's in, it's very difficult for that individual to leave that cycle. So a key question for researchers is how prevalent is this issue? And more importantly, how do people get involved in the cycle? Particularly in our Ontario context, there's very little data available. So through support from the Canadian Housing and Mortgage Corporation and in partnership with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness and the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, we started an initiative just to get some answers, because we had anecdotally as an organization always talked about how this is an issue. However, when we often got the question, well, how prevalent is this? We really could only provide anecdotal feedback back to individuals. So we said, is there data available? Can we dive a little deeper to really understand what is the scope of the issue? So the project is a 3-phase project. Phase 1 was a literature review, which is, I think, the stage where Jordan and I sort of collaborated quite heavily on, and a macro level quantitative data analysis. So looking at the scope across the province, and then what do broad data sets tell us about experiences of certain groups. The phase 2 is doing a much more personal interview with individuals with lived experience. So looking at the impact that justice involvement and homelessness and how it intersects with one another has on individuals. So it's again looking at the information in a different light. And then phase 3 is really looking at programs and policy recommendations to say, okay, what do the 2 stages and phases tell us, and what policy and program recommendations can we make? So as part of phase 1, we accessed, so one of the areas we sort of had a bit of a soul searching to say, like, what information exists in Ontario that can tell us something across sort of the province as a whole. And then we did sort of find a 14-year data set that the Ministry of Solicitor General in Ontario collects. The data is counts of individuals with what they call no fixed address. So at the time of incarceration at a provincial correctional institution. So the data is collected as part of the intake process in correctional settings. And anytime an individual indicates what there are either couch surfing, so a vast array of homeless experiences or experiencing of homelessness, whether it's couch surfing all the way to living in shelters or on the street, they're marked as having a no fixed address. So again, it's important to note that the data only told us whether these are admissions into correctional institution. They weren't unique individual. So the same person coming in multiple times a year would be counted as unique count. So that is one of the biggest limitations of the data. The data was also, the data provided an annual count for no fixed address, but it did also break it down by age, gender, the institution in which they were incarcerated at, and Indigenous status. And the data was from 2007 to 2021. So overall, the findings suggest that NFA has increased. So individuals or admissions with a no fixed address has increased over time. So in 2007, 2008, which was the first year of the data available, there were 4,700 admissions with NFA recorded. While in 2019 and 2020, the period which we had the full year worth of data, the number had increased to almost 8,533. So, a little under twice as much. In addition, the rate at which Indigenous admissions with no fixed address have also increased at a greater rate. Again, in 2007, 2008, there were only 307 admissions marked with no fixed address. While in 2019, 2020, that number had increased to 1,372. So again, it's not only an increase, but the rate at which the Indigenous no fixed address is increasing was at a greater rate compared to general population. The overall findings suggest that NFA have increased over time, and that there is no clear indication as to why that's happening. More people are being incarcerated. So one of the questions that we had is, why are the numbers increasing? Is it a symptom of more people being incarcerated and therefore the numbers increasing? Was it changes to data collection? Or more of that, more people experiencing or with homelessness are coming into contact with the justice system. Now, changes in data collection is difficult to answer based on the data that we collected. It really doesn't get reported how the data was collected and whether it was collected uniformly across the province. But what you could do was look at general admissions and see the proportion to which PFA counts were each year. So we FOI'd additional data looking at generally across the board how many admissions are made, and then how much of that proportion was no fixed address. So again, there was some very telling information. So what we found that NFA admissions make up a larger proportion year over year. So in 2007, 2008, only 6%, a little over 6% of admissions had no fixed address or marked as no fixed address. That number had increased to almost 16.5% of all admissions by 2019, 2020. So again, what that tells us that it's not a symptom of more people being incarcerated and therefore more people with more fixed address. The proportion of individuals with no fixed address is actually increasing. The data also suggests that the rates of total admission, we also want to look at the data from a different lens. Instead of reporting the data by institution, we categorized the institution into 4 regions. So the data that was available to us had annual counts of no fixed address per institution in Ontario. So instead of reporting on all sort of 25 provincial institutions, we broke them down into 4 regions to look at, is there any differences between the regions? So the 4 regions were Central, Eastern, Northern, and Western regions. What the data shows here is that the Central region, which is primarily Toronto and GTA, accounted for almost 56% of all NFA admissions in 2007 and 2008, but that proportion decreased significantly by 2020, 2021. So by 2020, 2021, the number was only at 45% of total admissions. The numbers in other regions obviously increased, particularly looking at Northern region. Northern region only accounted for 9% of total admissions in 2007, 2008, but that number increased to 15%, so almost doubled over time. So they, in 2020, 2021, the Northern region, which population-wise is quite small, actually made up 15% of all NFA admissions. So what that tells us is that the issues seem to be increasing in some of the rural regions and some of the remote regions in Ontario, something that Jordan alluded to earlier. So overall findings was that there are more incarcerations with no fixed address over time, and that the number of the increases in individuals being incarcerated doesn't account for those increases. So it's actually proportionately they're increasing as well. We're also, the data also suggests that non-central regions, so those in the north particularly, are experiencing a growth in NFA admissions. And then lastly, that NFA admissions of Indigenous people are growing at a faster rate than general population. So those are the 3 key takeaways from our first phase of the report. In phase 2, phase 1 report is actually out now. I should mention the no fixed address report is out on our website. I will link to it in the slides, and I'm sure Jordan and the team will share the slides out as well. But essentially in phase 1, the report includes what I just discussed, but also looking at other factors and other diving a little deeper into the data. The issue was that the data is incomplete in a couple of ways. Firstly, like I mentioned, there are counts of individuals counts of admissions into institutions. They're not counts of individuals. The other problem is that the data is very limited in what it can tell us. It can only tell us how individuals who are experiencing homelessness come into contact within justice system and obviously with the correctional system. It doesn't really tell us the impact that the correctional system itself has on people leaving institutions. So again, how does the experience of being involved in the correctional system and being incarcerated impact somebody's situation? So that is where phase 2 of our study comes in. In phase 2, we hope to, and this is the process that we are working on right now, we're hoping to actually have conversations with individuals, particularly in specific communities. We've selected 5 communities, a few urban, a few rural communities in Ontario, and we'll be doing in-depth interviews and surveys with individuals to see that are leaving correctional institutions, to see how correctional experiences involved in the correctional system, how does that translate to their experiences in the community and how it impacts their housing precarity. So that hopefully that report will be out next summer. And then based on those 2 reports, we'll be developing some in-depth recommendations and sort of suggestions for programming and services. I think that's it from me. My information is there. As Jordan mentioned, I do have to run, but I'm happy to take on any questions. I do have some time. I'll be staying on for the next 10-15 minutes. But if there are any further questions, I'm happy to answer those via email.
Great. Thanks so much, Reza. Just for the sake of keeping things nice and smooth, we'll just continue on with presentations rather than jumping into any type of question period for you. So yeah, I greatly recommend that you reach out to Reza, and especially if you have an interest on some of that research project, especially surrounding phase 2. I'm really excited to see the results of that. And it's unfortunate I'm no longer connected to that project, but I'm very excited that you're doing that. I think it's really meaningful. Thanks, Reza. Let's see here. So our next panelist is going to be David Howard. I've had previous conversations with David where I was trying to develop some new research into micro homes and housing, and I actually still hope to collaborate on research projects with him in the future. David is the founder and CEO of Homes for Heroes Foundation, which is a registered charity developed to help veterans experiencing homelessness. David owns several businesses and has been supporting those that have stood on guard for Canada through various charitable endeavors. He has spearheaded for the last 25 years. He and his team have successfully opened veteran villages in Calgary and Edmonton, and with Kingston and Winnipeg scheduled to open in the fall of 2023. I'm very grateful that he's here today to present to us. And David, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me to speak today. As I said, my name is Dave Howard. I am the co-founder and CEO of Homes of Heroes Foundation. Today, I'm going to briefly give you some background on myself, how I got involved in supporting our veterans, how the charity started, a review of the program, our setup, and our plan for future growth. And then I certainly welcome any questions during that time. You know, I am an entrepreneur with several marketing companies. I have a real estate company called To Market. I have an app development company. I produce concerts across Canada. So I am fairly involved and teed up, but I've also been involved in supporting our veterans for the last 20 years. I started a charity called Canadian Legacy Project about that time ago. I got involved in supporting our vets because of my father, my grandfather, my mother's father. I didn't know him growing up. He struggled with alcohol and therefore became very abusive. And that in turn led to our family not associating or working or chatting with him at all. So I think I've met him a couple of times in my life until I got into my late 20s. I went to visit him. And this is a gentleman that was president of BP Canada when he came back from World War II, then later in life, security guard in the same building, and later collecting cans. So he, alcohol really did him in, and he suffered. And at the time they called it shell shock, what Grandpa doesn't talk about. Now we're called post-traumatic stress. I'm not a big fan of post-traumatic stress. D, the disorder. I don't believe it's a disorder. Maybe that's a talk for another time. But so I went to visit my grandfather. He has a tiny room, 200 square feet. I slept on the floor. I woke up and sadly he was eating out of a can, and it was dog food. So that was certainly a difficult time for me. I didn't understand. I said, why aren't you going to the food bank or shelter and trying to get some assistance? And as a vet, and what I hear a lot is that that's for women and children. Those are more vulnerable than myself. So, it was a tough experience for me. It's certainly, obviously, he's lived a tough life. I got back home to Calgary, and sadly, he passed not too far after that. So I really believe I need to get involved, and I started Canadian Legacy Project, a charity run by volunteers for veterans. So all the dollars that come in get out. And we've been working on post-traumatic stress, education, retraining, whole gamut across Canada. But in 2017, a business partner of mine, Murray McCann, alerted to me the increasing issue of veteran homelessness. And Murray is the president of Field of Crosses in Calgary, and I was the volunteer president at the time. So I got to tell you, I was just quite shocked. And I think we speak to a lot of people today to hear that we have those that stood on guard for our country that are living on the street. But in doing some research, really, we saw the House of Commons did a report stating there were 5,000 veterans that were living on the street. We believe that number is closer to 10 to 15,000. The issue is that why those numbers are so difficult to ascertain is the majority of the time they're done in shelters, and you're asking veterans to self-identify. And they're not self-identifying just as my grandfather did because he's very proud, or in turn there's this fear of losing the benefits that they have. So we're seeing a lot more and more than the numbers are out there. But based on what I was seeing, I wanted to get out and find a solution, get an understanding of what was happening. And the best way I thought to do that with any of my companies, I'll give you some brief on, again, I am an entrepreneur, I hired a researcher, and I set out to spend some time in meeting with veterans across Alberta. So I met with over 200 veterans, one-on-one, sometimes in groups, on the street, the whole gamut, really just to get an understanding of saying, look, if we are going to build something, if there is a solution to this, what does the solution look like? And so overall, what they said to us was they wanted to come into a community. They wanted to come into a community of peers, those that had similar experiences. They felt more comfortable with that. And as I alluded to again, that there is this honor among them. So they wanted to come into a community, they wanted their own home. They want something, quite frankly, what I hear all the time from our social workers is that they can just close the door and feel safe. Our veterans are first coming in, our tenants coming into a village. Traditionally, we won't see them for a first week or so until they get settled. So they wanted a home, and they wanted to work. They wanted not only a home, but they wanted to get help. They wanted to get help for the reasons that got them on the streets. And then they wanted to find employment. So they weren't looking for a permanent residency. They were looking for a home, a community of peers, and then support for what got them on the streets. And then they wanted to get majority of them getting a job and then move out and make room for the next veteran. So that's exactly what we built. We built a tiny home village now with full wraparound supports to support those that have served our country, and working with our social workers on a day or weekly or day-to-day or every 2 weeks basis is, again, it's the idea of creating a successful transition to civilian life. We get asked a lot in regards to why tiny homes. And certainly, I've seen some great benefits with tiny home development. When we first built in Calgary, it was difficult to get. We had to go through council. There was a change in the bylaw. It's a difficult process. When we got into Edmonton, I got to say, just an incredible group there we worked with, really dedicated to it, and we managed to expedite that process, and it's getting better and better in regards to tiny homes. But what we found in regards to tiny homes, first off, that was kind of always the original idea. We liked the idea of the tiny home, but what solidified it was talking to shelters and homeless organizations across Canada. So traditionally, when they're not doing a new build to fit their needs, they're taking over apartment buildings. And they suggested that a lot of times you're coming into an apartment space, and it's 600, 700, 800 square feet. And that may not be a lot to you or I. Maybe some of you in Vancouver or Toronto, that is a big space for you. But for someone with very little belongings, coming into that space can be overwhelming. So what happens is they tend to hoard, and then they shut themselves off from society, and then you're offering a whole host of other issues. So they start to isolate, they can start drinking, they do drugs, and we really haven't helped the problem. So certainly that is why. So again, like I said, we took what we learned from the housing groups and from our veterans, and we built the Homes of Heroes program, which is, a program built by veterans for veterans. We are, as I talked to, we operate Calgary. Calgary opened 3 years ago. Edmonton's just opened now a year. And we are building in Kingston right now and Winnipeg, and the goal is to move across the country. I just wanted to give you some idea of how the program works. As our tenants come into the program, there is a needs analysis that's done, an understanding of their background. And so our social workers can put a plan together specific for that veteran. At the same time, our on-site counselors are helping our tenants with funding supports, whether that be through Veterans Affairs or the city, the province, federal government. We are grateful. We do have a partnership with Veterans Affairs, so that does help. And the majority of the services that our veterans access aren't done on site, they're off site, and the majority of those are already offered by Veterans Affairs. So having that partnership with Veterans Affairs, when our tenant comes in, the needs analysis, we have an understanding of what programming needs to happen there. We'll connect them with a service officer from Veterans Affairs. If there's drug and alcohol issues, then the majority of the time, the goal there is to get our tenants that have those issues into a program before they move in. So we'll hold a house for that individual until they've gone through that program. So our program is not meant to be a permanent solution. And that's because what our veterans ask for. Our tenants' journey could be a year, or others could be 3 years. The idea is to get them a home, help with why they ended up on the streets, give them some structure, and get them back into employment, and then permanent housing solutions. Our average tenant is roughly between the age of 30 to 50 years old. Veterans that are living rough, homelessness, near homelessness, couch surfing. Some tenants have physical or brain injuries, such as post-traumatic stress. We do have accessible homes within the villages. We, as I don't sure I allude, sorry, we have 20 homes per village, and with an on-site resource center and 2 offices. So we have 2 social workers too. Calgary is our smallest, our first village. It has 15 homes, but all moving forward we'll have 20 homes. We also believe in education. I think it's important what we do. We work with the community the best that we can, and we name all of our homes after our fallen. So it is an opportunity. We'll have a plaque outside of every home, and then we'll have those homes sponsored by a partner. And what we do is we work with schools and we tour them through the village, and it gives them an opportunity to learn from learn from the veterans themselves one-on-one. It has a chance for our veterans to integrate and to work with their kids, and then to learn about our veterans. I think especially you learn at this time, a day before Remembrance Day. This is when people are paying attention to our veterans. Our goal is to make sure they're doing it throughout the year. We have some proud men and women that have stood on guard for our country. We have a lot of them are suffering right now, 10 to 15,000 that are on the street, that are looking for homes, that need help. And unfortunately, they've come back broken. They've got injuries, and I think that is certainly my opinion that they stood on guard for us, and it's time for us to stand up for them. So certainly you can, our goal is to build across Canada, build in every major center. We believe that we're winning this battle right now. We've had 20 graduates from our 2 villages operating now. So as I said, we have Calgary that's operated for 3 years. We didn't operate it at first. We were working with a social service provider, the Mustard Seed. We have now since taken over for the last year. And then Edmonton's been open for a year. I share a quick story with you. Is we had a gentleman that was living in his car in Vancouver. He got a hold of our team. We got him on a bus out to the car in Vancouver. It didn't work. He was just living in the car. We got him to to our Edmonton village. We got him in a meeting right away with our social worker, put him onto a plan. Within a week, he was getting social supports from VAC and getting that disability that he had. Second week, he was doing training with commissionaires, and in 30 days he was working full-time. So that's how quick it can happen. Not to say that that's happening with all of our tenants. We've certainly had those that have not succeeded and not been able to get through the program. They've had issues that that we need to get them into other programming. We've had some veterans that have left the program because they didn't want to participate. But our program is all about having our veterans participate. The goal here is for them to make a commitment to themselves, to work the program, and to work with each other. And again, building that community and that village, and that is been very successful to that healing process. So again, I thank you for your time today. This is our website, h4hf.ca. Please reach out to me anytime if you have any questions through the process. We hope to, as I said, grow across Canada. In order to do that, we partner with the city, the province, and the federal government. The issue of homelessness, is, as I see it, is something that has gotten so big that we all need to participate in this. It is something that the city, it's costing the city, it's costing the province. And too many times we see cities saying, you know, that's a provincial problem. And I think the province understands that. There's only so much that they have the budget for. So again, if we can break down those hurdles and get easier solutions, like having tiny homes and letting those zoning controls go down, so it doesn't take a year and a half, and $400,000 to do this, then I think that we'll be better for that. So thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, David, for that. If anyone, just a reminder, if anyone has questions, you can throw in the chat. I would ask the presenters just not to address them in the chat. After the presentations are done, I'm going to go through the chat and look at any of the questions posted, or you can save them and actually ask them verbally. Let's see here. So our final panelist is going to be Gerard G. Joyle, who is the convener of the Lived Experience Circle on Homelessness for the Central Okanagan Journey Home Society. The circle was formed as a means to inform the Journey Home Task Force in the development of its strategic plan, and to continue to inform the society with the voice of people with lived and living experience with the homelessness serving systems in the community. I unfortunately have not previously met G, if that's how you prefer to be referred to as, which I find strange since I previously conducted research with the Kelowna Homelessness Research Collaborative, and I have done some stuff in the past with the Central Okanagan Journey Home Society. So hopefully after today, I'll be able to connect with you and kind of pick your brain on some things. But thank you so much for being here today. And G. Joyle, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Awesome. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, apologies for jumping in a bit late to the whole thing, but I appreciate being here. I'm going to just start off right off with sharing the screen. I'm going to be jumping through a couple of different pages or documents, so just bear with me, please. So one of the first things we always like to do is welcome people from the unceded territory of the Okanagan Silks Nation. We're grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play here. We have a high mandate in our Central Okanagan Journey Home Society work and the work of the Lived Experience Circle on Homelessness to honor and respect the concepts of reconciliation and to apply them in all the things we do. So with that, I'm going to jump into this next piece. So in about 2017, the Kelowna municipality decided that there was an issue with homelessness that was not being addressed at a provincial or federal level. There was not resources being offered or supported to address a growing homelessness situation here in the Okanagan and specifically in Kelowna. One of the unique characteristics of Kelowna and the experience of homelessness is that the available market housing or property or land is minus zero, like it's less than zero. There's nothing available for people. There's other communities that have joined with some of the federal programs out there that have been able to utilize other resources in a community like land, like buildings, like landlord property development to be able to support opportunities. Unfortunately, in Kelowna, that's just doesn't exist. There is just no land, and the little bits and spaces that are out there, people don't want to share, and they don't want to share it, especially with a homeless initiative. So. For us, it was a big shift in the city's mentality. It was very much driven by the municipality to come up with some creative forces to address this. They generated a task force of approximately, I'm going to say approximately 25 to 30 individuals of importance in the STEAM and their resources in the community. And that task force very quickly realized that they didn't have all the information they needed. They needed lived experience voices at the table to help inform their decision making. And so they brought in a few people that they recruited into the task force. And basically that task force and those folks decided that a couple of people wasn't enough. They needed a small army of diverse experiences and diverse backgrounds in the experience of homelessness, because it's not uniform as they may have thought to begin with. But already we've heard today from veterans homelessness, and the experience that they have might be very different from an Indigenous homeless perspective. And there might be, again, a number of different facets with, new residents to Canada, et cetera. So there's a diverse experience of homelessness, and they realized that they needed to broaden that horizon. So what they went on to do is, I'm just going to try and advance here. Sorry, my slide isn't advancing the way it should. So the intention was then to create a small resource of people with lived and living experience of homelessness in order to help facilitate the conversation and inform decision making about what was going to happen next. So that's when my position came on board as a convener for lived experience. So my background is fundamentally in mental health and addictions work. However, I have a history of experience of homelessness as a youth, and then a number of other sort of life experiences that would put me in a unique position to be able to build relationship with individuals who are currently experiencing homelessness and try and bring them around to having an opportunity to share their experience and their value with the broader community. So in our work, we created this vision. We gathered at some point up to 200 individuals who are currently experiencing homelessness, so individuals who are currently unhoused here in our Kelowna library. And we had brainstorming sessions and conversations of people of all walks and different varieties of the experience of homelessness. We created a vision, and the vision of the Lived Experience Circle was a voice for the homeless or those at risk of homelessness, and creating openness with understanding, releasing fear, judgment, and initiating change. And so that is the objective of the Lived Experience Circle. Out of those 200 or so folks, we were able to recruit a small group of about 12 individuals who were then became the core lived experience circle. Now, those individuals became what we call our actual operating and informing circle. And these individuals are all recently housed or formerly unhoused individuals with a diverse experience. So we have representation of age, gender, First Nations. And so we try and broaden our representation as much as we can. And these folks are collected and utilized as a resource and to inform decision-making at high levels. Some of the things that were really important in the very beginning was housing. And so with the support of BC Housing and this drive from the community, they were able to develop 6 supportive housing sites, introducing 3 new temporary shelters and start to develop some multiple scattered site homes. In the past 3 years, and this is going back to 2021, back to 2019, there was approximately 300 individuals were housed through those processes. So these were low barrier housing first initiatives supported by like Built for Zero and Reaching Home Dollars and BC Housing. These are operated by different agencies in the community who have capacity to manage these sites. At this point, we still have the same number of low barrier housing sites and the increase in shelter units. However, locally at this point, the main stressor is an increase in population of people experiencing homelessness and decrease in shelter and service provider capacity because there's an inadequate staffing supply. And I think that's a broad problem across the nation. In Kelowna, we're being hit really, really hard. We have a shelter right now that just opened for the winter. It's one of our, we call our winter shelters. It has the capacity for over 40 folks, but they can only operate with about 20 folks in there because we just don't have the staffing to sufficiently provide safety. I talked a little bit about our culture of inclusion at LECO. And so we do try and have a broad understanding and a broad perspective brought to the table. One of the main objectives of our project is to infiltrate community advisory committees, generate anti-stigma information, operate within local peer employment and peer navigator programs. There's a place called the Kelowna Operators Table, which is where all the service providers come together and share information and share support and work on things. This became very prevalent during COVID. The Operators Table became a space where real-time problems received real-time solutions because we had a number of the right people at the table. Members of the Lived Experience Circle also have a seat on the Journey Home Board of Directors. So they're a full voting member in directing how the Journey Home moves forward. And then since sort of this slide was developed a few years back, there's a number of agencies and services that we have a relationship with. We have a bi-weekly meeting where lived experience members come and gather. We have an agenda and we have guests that come to the table to share information. Some of those guests include local bylaw, RCMP, city representatives, the Journey Home, Human Rights Commission. Let's see who else. There's a number of people that have come over the years. John Howard Society, CMHA, et cetera, all usual representatives that come around. And what it is that our lived experience circle members would regularly go out into the streets. They go out into places where people congregate. They go to all the shelter systems. They go to all the low barrier housing systems. They go to the outdoor sheltering sites we have here in Kelowna, and they gather and converse with individuals and be able to bring back real-time information about how things are working, what the experience, what the temperature of the relationship between city bylaw, RCMP, and people who are experiencing homelessness and unhoused, the unhoused experience. And we bring that back to the table and have conversations with those providers of service and try and navigate some things. There's incidents occur. And within a week, we can have a conversation with the RCMP about what their perspective is, what the word on the street is, and get clarity and are able to much more safely navigate some of those complicated relationships out in the community by having this space where people with current lived experience in the community are starting to recognize a member of LECO by their name badge and their representation. They can give them information about things they're experiencing, and usually within a few weeks, there's some sort of visual and tangible outcomes. They're not always what an individual is hoping for, but what they're starting to recognize in the reporting back we're getting is that they're able to see that their voice is being heard in spaces that they didn't think their voices would ever go. And so it's not a perfect outcomes every time, but at least voices are being heard and conversations are happening on a basis of a human level and not just a systems level. We've had a number of members over the years. We've at any given time, we have between 8 and 12 active members. And we've had challenges with recruitment through COVID. And we're just getting back into a space where we're going to be able to continue to recruit. We have a model in our terms of reference where we have a turnover mandate where individuals can be a part of the LECO structure for a period of time. And then our aim is to recruit people who are closer to the heart of the experience of homelessness. So people who are more newly housed or people who are still potentially experiencing homelessness, but have the capacity to have the stability to be a participant or to join us. So we're always looking for the most up-to-date representation and the up-to-date experience. Although we have members who have been housed for a long time, and some of them even work in the sector now, the idea is that they defer and they become an alumni support in our work, and the real voice is drawn from the people who are as close to the experience as we can get. I did talk briefly about COVID, and so that impacted our ability to go into site and go to places pretty significantly. Where at one point 2 members would go and visit a housing environment, they were able to go into the communal space of that environment where they could attract individuals. They could go into certain spaces. COVID changed all that. But one of the cool things is that even though they weren't permitted inside sites or inside buildings or inside shelters, et cetera, to have those conversations, we had a number of service providers encourage us to just be in the foyer or just be right outside the door and to continue to do the work that we were doing and as close to the heart of the space as we could. And that was really good because I think what was happening is the repercussions of those conversations were being experienced, not just by the people who are service users, but the service providers were actually getting valuable information about real-time ways that they could change and make support. So this again is a bit of an outdated slide. So at one point we had 28 separate sites that we went to. Members visited each of those sites basically every 2 weeks on a schedule and a routine so that individuals could become accustomed to the presence. And since April 2020, this would have been in 2019, we were already up over 1,000 points of individual contact. And this is documented that the members take brief notes. They don't take data. They just take some notes about the experiences, and then they share that stuff with the community. Here's some of the members in our community that are supporters and we have relationships with that I was talking about. The Journey Home Society itself, City of Kelowna, Urban Matters, some of you might know them. There's the Kelowna Homelessness Research Collaborative that Phil was talking about, which are an incredible resource and an incredible support to the Journey Home and the Lived Experience Circle. So there's a number of different places, and we're always advocating and reaching out to find new places to be able to share the voice of the people experiencing homelessness, but also vice versa to help systems design in those spaces. Some of the things that have happened. So in our community, one of the big ones was the CAC, the Community Advisory Committee. So in Kelowna, there was a very big NIMBY issue with the housing units that were going in, or the low barrier housing first projects that were going in. There was a lot of people like physically protesting. There was one event where we had, nearly 100 seniors who were deathly afraid that if we put a building in their community that everything was just going to fall apart. And they were literally picket sign protesting outside of the city's hall announcement of the project. And so the lived experience members, people who were currently and recently experiencing homelessness, walked through that picket line. They walked through that protest and heard the things that were being said about them, kept their chin up, went in and made their presentations and did their work. And out of that became this idea for the community advisory committees here in Kelowna. Each project that came up became attached to an advisory committee that was invited. Members of the community were invited, the RCMP, community safety, municipality workers. A number of people were put at the table, and people with lived experience both people from LECO, and it was open to people who were residents of the site or potential residents of the site, to be able to work out the issues and have a point of meeting and a conversation in a space that was safe for everybody. It was safe for the community that lived around the site. And it was also a safe place for the people who might potentially be living in the site to meet and have conversations. And what we found is that when those people were in the same room, things really changed. And the ability to have conversations in a healthy and productive way really changed. Instead of being across the street from each other, waving flags and pointing fingers, creating a space to have that relationship was huge. There was a lot of misdirected anger towards the people who were experiencing homelessness, because individuals in the community reported that they didn't know that they could talk to the service provider. They didn't know how to approach a service provider. They didn't know how the system was working in their community. And so by creating a space where they could come and ask a question and have the right person answer the question, or they could come with a concern and have the right person deal with the concern, and they could learn about how the systems were working in their community and how things came together. Those community advisory committees operated for about a year on a monthly basis for most of the sites. And within a year and a half, most of those community advisory committees went down to quarterly meetings, and a number of them over a couple of maybe 2.5 years have gone to as needed. Because the members in the community who originally were, literally protesting in the streets, they've not only come to a term of acceptance, but they've also had their questions answered. They've had people respond to them in a healthy and productive way, so that it wasn't, and like many of you probably are familiar with, the us versus them was a big part of our campaign for this work. But the idea was that there is no us and them, and that as a community member, it includes all the folks. So we are not directly connected with service providers. The members of LECO aren't attached to any particular service provider. Journey Home Society doesn't actually provide any direct service to people who experience homelessness. They support the navigation of services in the community. And so as a member of LECO, you're not a representative of an agency or a service provider. So individuals who are experiencing homelessness didn't have the same, they didn't have to filter anything. They didn't have to watch their mouth or curb their tongue in order to give us feedback on things, because we weren't responsible for their housing opportunities. We weren't responsible for their shelter opportunities. They could give us real information that we could use to support the system and on a broader level, without them jeopardizing the opportunity to access a service. And so we found that we got some really different information from what service providers were reporting. And when we were able to compare notes, we were able to see why and how those things could be adjusted. These are images. When we first met, we had a graphic designer or graphic artist come in and do these graphic notes instead of taking notes. We didn't take any minutes through our process of developing the lived experience circle. But this is some of the stuff when you have 200 individuals who are experiencing homelessness in a library, in a local library, and they're having a conversation about what the experience of homelessness is like. This is the type of image you get. And we found these images to be incredibly powerful for media campaigns. We found them there's incredibly valuable we use these images, the Journey Home use these images in their conversations with the municipality, council members, and those types of things, to be able to convey emotion and convey the reality of the experience in a way that a chart or a graph isn't necessarily going to compute. So we found this type of model to be incredibly effective, and it was also really valuable for the people experiencing homelessness, because they didn't have to worry about exactly what they said. They didn't have to be, worry about that they said the wrong thing or that they were misquoted or anything like that. This was about the emotional state. This is about the mind state. This is about the experience rather than, details, facts, or data, right? It's a very different thing. The objectives of LECO are to continue to advocate for the desired outcomes of the journey home. A major factor, or the three major factors that LECO identified, and this was identified by the peers, is to continue peer support and develop it in our community. At the time, there was no peer navigators. If there was anything along those lines, nobody knew about it. Today, we have an incredible amount of peer support network happening in our community. So paid positions for individuals with lived and living experience of different categories: opioid response, homelessness, substance use, mental health, interior health work through our, there's a number of places where they've now developed lived experience individuals to be navigators within the system. And a lot of that came out of those early conversations. The next thing was support public awareness to reduce stigma. So the lived experience circle has been key to a number of anti-stigma campaigns here, specifically in the city. We've supported ones more broad in the province. And recently they did a targeted, in partnership with Urban Matters, they did a targeted research project on how to use social media like a Facebook model to figure out how messages are received, how different types of concepts are received by a broader community in a social media model. It was a very interesting project. They used a couple of scenarios that were derived from real lived experiences and created personas, presented those personas in a community forum on Facebook, and then monitored the results. What kind of chatter happened? What kind of, who's paying attention to these things? What kind of comments were made? If you said these types of comments, what kind of responses did you get versus different things? So it was a really interesting project. And again, it was a place where lived experience individuals were part of the research and development of that project right from the beginning. Informing organizational development of the homeless serving system. So this is one of the biggest ones and probably where we have the most impact, is acting as a liaison between the greater lived experience community and the Journey Home Society and beyond. So, when we're having meetings, just lived experience members and BC Housing, or just lived experience members and the RCMP, or just lived experience members and the Health Authority, it's pretty phenomenal to have that experience and to be able to influence decisions that they might be making. I'm going to skip over that. Recruitment. This is just more of the dynamics of the imagery that was created through those conversations. This was over a series of workshops that we had where people would have these conversations about how we're going to get from A to B in our community. The types of things that came up. There's a key one. I'm not sure if you can see over here. Some of the biggest information or the biggest things that were talked about was a community that listens and a community that responds. And then down here is a representation of using experts as lived experience to guide their work. And this is what the individuals who are experiencing homelessness were asking for. This is how they wanted to bridge the gap between systems, knowledge, service providers, and data and research versus the actual experience. One of the things I walk away with from this all the time is the awareness and the value of bringing those voices into the room, and how I watch service providers, data crunchers, politicians, et cetera, turn from a systems concept and a homeless problem into a human issue and a relational experience. When we have lived experience members who now have long-term relationships, they've known council members, city council members for a long time. They see each other on the street, and one person's still living in a tent, but they know each other's name. And when they pass each other in the street, they stop and have a conversation. To me, that's where the fundamental value of the work has really paid off. There's a number of places where we have met and been part of the community. We all need support. We all need the time and dignity it takes to figure things out for ourselves and to be aided when necessary. We all need the uniqueness and specifics of our individual circumstances to be taken seriously by those who claim they want to help, and that no one size fits all approach will ever be as effective. Everybody wants, all of the individuals that I've ever worked with have all they've ever asked for. No one's ever asked for money. Most of them didn't even ask for a home. They didn't want shoes. They didn't want anything. They wanted respect. They wanted dignity, and they wanted to be included rather than judged. And that's the experience that comes out of individuals. These are phrases that came out of these conversations. This is a paraphrasing, of course, because we didn't take direct notes, but the knowledge and insight exists. The suggestion is to go look for it honestly and openly, and you'll find it. Move with compassion, empathy, and a willingness to understand a stranger's perspective. These are not throwaway words from a Hallmark card or a sappy movie. They're the foundation of a better society that we can all help create. And the key point there is that we all, and the inclusion of people with lived and lived experiences has to be a part of that to be effective. So the challenge is to move into challenging yourself, your family, your friends, communities, to re-examine perspectives. Talk and listen openly to the folks in your communities who are living the experiences of being in the margins. It's not necessary to decide for them, but to help empower them and to be able to work through these things on their own and drive change in their community based on their actual experience and needs. So that's a bit of a snapshot of how the lived experience circle in Kelowna sort of came. There's so much more to talk about in it. There's so much more to unpack in that experience of bringing lived experience voices to the table. I encourage everyone there. I'm just going to try to see if I can. The Journey Home website is simple. It's journeyhome.ca, and it's got all the information in it. And I can pop that into the chat box as well if we have to. But there's some information on how the Journey Home organization and society is operating in the Okanagan. And in there is embedded the lived experience circle on homelessness. So I hope that informs people and provides people some sort of insight or information on how to or the value of introducing lived experience voices into the systems design and work that you might be doing. So with that, I will pass. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take a quick moment just to thank the presenters today. Without you, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't get to hear all this knowledge and experience. So I'm not going to have everyone clap online, but a symbolic round of applause, or there we go. I got the reaction button. There we go. Thanks so much. Just thinking about some of the things from the presentations that come to my own mind, especially as a statistical professor. I had Reza and even David mention about the statistics, and there's always been a problem with counting homelessness and who gets counted and how they're counted, and there's great underrepresentation of homelessness. And I think this is also why looking at lived experience is so important, because the data and the numbers might give you some indication of the proportion of those experiencing homelessness in a community, but it really doesn't tell you why or how they became homeless or what's working for them or the barriers and all those kind of things, which is also why having something like the lived experience circle on homelessness is so important, because it also gives, it acts as a great resource for these voices to be heard and to actually inform the numbers. And I think those things work really well together. Also, homelessness, it is such a broad issue, and it becomes overwhelming for a lot of individuals when you try and think of the problem of homelessness overall. So sometimes it's easy to break it down to its individual parts, which seems to be like what Homes for Heroes does, is break it down into specifically focus on veterans, or what Reza was doing with the John Howard Society and specifically focusing on those who have intersectionality with the criminal justice system. But at the end of the day, I think it's really great when organizations and responses and communities come back together at the end of the day and learn from each other and see innovative experiences, and what might work for one group might actually work out for the other, or lessons learned. So those are just my few thoughts on that. Thank you all for being here, and thank you again to the panelists and Reza. Of course, I'll message him later and say thank you for him being here because he's gone. And I guess maybe Oishi, you might want to.
Thank you all for taking the time to moderate and present. I'll follow up with you guys on an email as well, so I won't hold you here any longer. And just thank you to everyone else who participated today.